think we are up and running, hopefully. Okay, so today's episode is going to be about essentially ascending. I told you yesterday I was going to talk about what ascension is, why it's happening, what brought us here, and yeah, so that's what today's episode is going to be about. So ascension. Okay, here we go. We're just going to jump right in. I wrote it down so it'd be easier for me to just go through instead of my head getting scatterbrained. So ascension, what is it? Signs and symptoms. Ascension is when you raise your light body frequency and consciousness to a higher frequency or vibration. Signs and symptoms. The world will seem completely different, more brighter, beautiful. You'll feel a stronger connection to nature. You'll feel a oneness. You'll have an increased sensitivity. You'll feel grateful for how you perceive the new world. It's like being in a new world when you finally start to awaken. And I've experienced this brighterness. I've expressed it in previous videos long before I even conceived this idea of this series that I'm now doing. You'll feel less compelled to dwell on the past, not very interested in daydreaming about the future. Most likely they will feel like they all merged with the present. You'll come to understand you're an infinite being of light and energy, so there is really no limit to your time here. Time is a construct of man. There's actually no such thing as time, and you'll come to understand that and accept it. 3. You will begin to experience the feel of a constant presence, knowing it's all around everything and in between everything. You'll come to know it as Source, and Source will be mentioned a lot in my series. And I will explain all the science behind this soon. I will be explaining it at the end. It's astonishing. And then I'm going to be sharing something with you, and I urge you all to go and get an account on Gaia, because lots of what I'm going to be talking about is from Gaia. So you need that. 4. You will start to understand that everything, even things that don't seem to be alive, like a couch or a fork, actually are alive, and there is science behind it. I will explain that as well at the end. For those who say, oh, she's in love with the couch. No, there is a science behind it. And I think I've talked about a little bit of it. If you understand photons and light energy, then you already have a small understanding of what I'm going to be telling you later in this episode. Another sign is feeling like you're a completely different person. And that is also going to be explained later in the episode. Science is behind it for those skeptics. So just bear with the list, then we'll get into the juicy stuff, okay? 5. As you become more awake, your mind won't be as noisy anymore. You'll have periods when it's quiet, easier to focus, and not so disconnected from what's around you because of all your thought noise. Meditation is one of the ways that happened for me and was a huge game changer for sleep time. 6. Oh my lord, it's my son. Hold on. Okay, let's try this again. 6. At one of the first levels of awakening, you'll feel a connection with everyone and everything. As you awaken more, it intensifies to the point you become aware you are everything and everyone, and they are you. You're the earth, the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, the clouds, the trees. We are all one. There is no distinction anymore. It dissolves, and all that's left is oneness. 7. As you become more and more awake, you'll experience empathy more, and so much love and compassion. You'll no longer have those judgmental thoughts, negative thoughts, or even angry thoughts. It turns into love and compassion, wanting to comfort rather than hurt. You'll feel like healing the pain you feel coming from other people and even the earth herself. 8. You will begin to let go of the mundane pressures about the future. You won't feel guilt or unease about the past. You will be grateful for every moment shared and experienced because you are free from the psychological suffering and pain of the three-dimensional experience. 9. As you begin further awakening, you will stop worrying and having fear. Most of all, you won't feel like death is the end of everything, period. You'll learn to understand that we are photonic, as I said, I'll explain this all, and our consciousness is a living energy source. And once our bodies rest, we are transformed back into our photonic energy bodies and return to source. 10. You will no longer feel like you need to belong to labels or groups. You'll understand that we are all one, and in that respect, everyone equally, because we are all unified in the awakening reality. There is no difference in religion because they all speak of the same source. Again, I'm saying source because it's all one thing. One. Oneness. Unity. Okay? Respect and love is now the religion and political stance. 11. You'll become aware of the impacts of global warming, climate change, social justice, exploitation of animals, child slavery, and sweatshops, and their impact on the environment. You'll feel an urge to help and fix these issues. They're as important to you as fashion is to the third dimensional experience. 12. Good or bad, right or wrong, aren't defined by convention anymore. You become aware of this because you become more moral in nature. You'll feel compelled to set the record straight, to bring about the morally good and the morally right. 13. You'll be humble in the sense you know you do not know everything and you are not a guru. You are not guru. You are a continuous student of the world and you will appreciate everything more deeply. Learning is always happening every second. There is there is no one who knows all, okay? We will not know all until we get to source. 14. You'll start to see a purpose, compelled to help others or heal suffering, serve the human race, a mission to end the sleep slavery. That's the one I'm on currently. I want to heal the earth, heal people, and I want to awaken as many people as possible. 15. You won't fear being alone or doing nothing. That is a symptom of the third dimensional experience we call sleep madness. In the three-dimensional reality, life is busy and chaotic. If you're not moving, you're not happy or successful, when in fact, you're more happy because you're at harmony in your well-being. You don't need more distractions because you're not afraid to be still. 16. You'll lose interest in possession, status, and money. You'll focus less on what you can get out of the world and more of what you can give to the world. 17. You'll feel less impulse to conform to the social norms. People will think you're crazy, but in fact you're more alive than ever. You'll not need to worry or fear what tomorrow brings, or if your hair is right, your makeup's on point. They're all of a sudden pointless in the pursuit to awakening, healing, and helping the earth. 18. Relationships will feel more meaningful and fulfilling, but others may see you as selfish because you're not because because you're less centered around yourself, conventional norms. You must wear a modest, acceptable social mask. Where spiritually awakened, you are you without apology. That kind of security makes the three-dimensional asleep reality insecure around you, sadly. So now we're going to move into why. Why you're ascending. We have to go over so much, but essentially, like the earth has cycles and seasons, so do the consciousness of the universe. And before that can make any kind of sense, we have to discuss the universe. So here we go, the juicy stuff. So what is the universe? You may think of it as a big void that science and NASA says just happened in a flash for no apparent reason. But what if, like planets, galaxies, humans, the universe is a living consciousness and it evolves with cycles or seasons like everything in nature? Look at a tree. All year it changes. Leaves fall and it dies during winter, only to be reborn at spring. What seems like an end of a cycle is really a pause before the next one begins. In so many videos and articles I've been learning from spirit science and wisdom teachings all about the precession of the equinox. By the way, what is the precession of the equinox? It's basically cycles of our planet. The consciousness within it, every 25,000 years, there's a wobble of the Earth's axis. We have cycles of awakening and falling asleep, depending on which angle the axis is turned. So right now we're here, we're said to be moving this way. So I'm not too sure exactly how that's going to work, like if it's a slow migration wobble or if it's just a sudden wobble. But I do know that the awakening started December 21st, 2012, because the end of the last sleep cycle of 25,000 years ended that day, which was part of the Mayan calendar, and that's what they were basically telling us. It's the end of the sleep state, and now we're going back into the awakening. So now we are all beginning to awaken again. So why? Why are we all awakening? Why do we have these cycles and processions and whatnot? Because the universe can be finally traced back to a single source. There it is. Yes, I said it. A source. Like coral, which is, I'll get into that later. Planets, stars, galaxies are all fractals from one single source. While they're having an individual experience, life cycles, evolution, just like coral, they have figured this out by torching the little nodes on it. They torched it and they found that underneath there's one source that feels all the pain, and when one feels pain, they all feel pain because they're all of a collective mind. It's the same thing with stars, planets, nebulas, galaxies, us. We're all one collective consciousness from source. So that's where all that comes from. They're all part of one. We are essentially the same. We were made from the universe stardust. That's what they said. And I'm going to show you a clip from Wisdom Teachings in a moment. Since new discoveries every year are being made, what I've come to understand is we've mapped the shape of the universe, which is in the episode I'm going to show you from Wisdom Teachings. It's not flat or an oval or even a sphere. Nope. It's quite literally one of the sacreds of sacreds, the holies of holies, geometric shape seen in all religions and sacred texts around the world. It's in every single religion, only it has different names and different pictures, depictions, but it's all the same symbol, same geometric shape. It's called a tetrahedron, also known as a Merkaba. And it'll be explained in this episode, and they'll show you diagrams, whatnot, don't worry. Now, what does that have to do with us specifically? Let me just say every freaking thing, okay? Every freaking thing, and you're going to find that out. So they've been doing studies, and if you really want to learn about all of this, I highly recommend Gaia Series Wisdom Teachings, Season 29, all of it, with David Wilcox. Anyways, these studies have broken down DNA, or rather found the geometric shape of the smallest cells in DNA, and they all have the same geometric shape as, have you guessed it yet? Have you guessed it? Why this has everything to do with us? Because we are fractals from down to the molecular cellular level in DNA. The cells within DNA have a geometric shape, and that geometric shape is, drum roll, boom, tetrahedron Merkaba. Yes, We are all three-dimensional images of fractalization of tetrahedron. All of us, everything, all of every single thing. Now, how is that possible? How is that possible? It's because Source, the universe, is possible. It's one consciousness. Source is the oneness, unified. So, if Source is the shape of the tetrahedron and fractaled out, and all of space is basically made up of fractalizations, making spheres or whatever else in the universe. I don't know if there's any other shapes in the universe. Probably are. Who knows? Probably ovals and whatnot. They're all fractalizations of one single geometric shape, a Merkaba. So that's why it's in every single religion as the life force, the energy, whatever you want to call it. It's the source of everything. The tetrahedron is the source. Okay? So that was crazy amazing when I figured this out. And that's kind of what sparked me to want to do these episodes so that I could help others understand the profoundness of this knowledge and how long it's taken anyone to even figure it out. Because, as you guys know, the science community is very tight knit. They have set in their ways, which isn't very scientific at all. If you know anything, science is a discovery and is a discovery of new and ever evolving knowledge, right? So science itself can't restrict itself to certain laws or idealizations. It shouldn't be like that. Science should be always ever evolving, ever learning, ever discovering, right? So them being closed-minded and all because of whatever ideologies that they hold personally, their personal bias, has hindered the growth of knowledge. But thankfully, there are people like Gaia Network who actually want people to explore and discover new science and new things. So that's why David Wilcock 20 years ago started learning about all this kind of stuff. And he's been saying it for the last 5 years that we don't know anything about the universe. We don't know nothing. And now, because of all this time, Gaia bringing out these things, and there's like millions of people watching now, and there's people like me, light workers and um, ascension teachers and whatnot, coming out and talking about it. It kind of bring a big, huge light bulb on, and everybody's like, okay, well, maybe we should start researching this. So now peer-reviewed mainstream scientists are now discovering the same thing. And so I'm going to show you this episode of from Gaia. I started it from how he talks about the beginning of the universe until the end because it is all relevant for this episode for you to understand what it is about our ascension that's causing this. It's all relative and it's all related. Okay, so I'm gonna bring my tablet up over here because I try to do it on the computer to like screen share, but it's slow and you won't even hear it. So I'm gonna unplug my headphones so that you can hear from the microphone. I'm gonna put this as close as I can to the screen, and the microphone's actually at the screen. So that it's not so like,
So then we're supposed to believe that all of the magic that led to the creation of life occurred in a very short period of time because microorganisms have been found that are almost as old as when liquid water began on Earth. You have to remember something important here. When we're talking about single-celled organisms, even that level, microorganisms, which could in fact have multiple cells, not just one. By the time you get to that stage of evolution of life, you have solved the majority of all the problems that need to be solved in order to have biological life occur. You've got DNA, which is staggeringly complex. You have cell mitosis, the separation of cells. You have respiration. You have locomotion. They can move around. They can breathe. All of the things that make life so intrinsic, that make life what it does, start at the cellular level. So the cell is extraordinarily complex. We still can't even begin to understand the full depth of cellular technology, if you want to call it that. We just have a lot of question marks, and when we start to get into more of this biological stuff, you're going to see that frequency and geometry plays a much greater role than we ever thought was possible. So just so that we're clear, all of the stuff that's involved in getting the cell to form is probably 80-90% of the challenge of evolution. Once you've got cells, they can grow into organ systems, they can make larger organisms, but by the time you've got the cell, you've solved most of the problems. The real problem is in how do you construct that cell? How do you get the cell to actually work? And in the conventional Charles Darwin-inspired model of biology, we're literally being taught that cells formed out of nothing. That they just arose from all these random accidents. And of course, as I've said before, they talk about this primordial soup, that this basic muck of ingredients got hit by lightning, and they combined in just the right way to make this complex cellular microstructure with DNA and all. It's like, wait a minute. A bolt of lightning hitting mud, that's the answer? It probably would have taken billions of years by random processes to get up to the point that you would even have a cell that's alive based on this random idea. And so finally, science is coming to accept, no, we can't explain it away by saying it's random. It had to have already been there before. So that's the pretext for this. Now let's read specific excerpts of what they said in this article. New analysis of the oldest known fossil microorganisms provides strong evidence to support an increasingly widespread understanding that life in the universe is common. Hold on a minute. An increasingly widespread understanding that life in the universe is common? See how this paves the way for disclosure? Because once you get to life is common, then why wouldn't it be intelligent life? And then you have this guy, as I've talked about in other lectures, coming out of Yale saying convergent evolution, that everything's going to want to make a humanoid being because it's the right way to do it. You got the brain at the top, it's a nice dome skull. The dome is crack resistant, so if you fall, it's the largest distance from the ground. You got to have the nostrils above the mouth, so when you eat, it doesn't fall into your nose. You want to have the eyes above the nose, so you don't get stuff in your eyes. You want to have the ears on the side. You got to have the hands. You got to be able to walk on two legs. This is a common thing that would work very well for intelligent life, no matter where it goes. So all of this stuff is interesting, an increasingly widespread understanding that life is common. Okay, you're the scientist, so I've been saying this for 20 years, so I'm very happy about this. Let's keep reading. Microorganisms from Western Australia are 3.465 billion years old. And again, as I was saying, the universe is 13.5 billion years old, roughly speaking. The Earth started 4 billion years ago, and it cooled down approximately 3.8 billion years ago. So some of these organisms seem to go back 3.6, maybe even older billion years old. 3.6 is very close to 3.8. So in 0.2 billion years, you have the whole problem of cells and DNA and life solved by random processes. It's silly. But the only thing, the only thread that a skeptic could hold on to try to say, well, maybe there's a way that this could have been done randomly. These UCLA scientists just slammed it down Because what you're about to see is a wide diversity of different types of microorganisms that all just sprung out of the box out of nowhere 3.465 billion years ago. Let's take a look. Scientists from UCLA and the University of Wisconsin-Madison report today in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that two of the species they studied appear to have performed a primitive form of photosynthesis. That means they're like plants. Another apparently produced methane gas, very different than plants. They produce oxygen. And two others appear to have consumed methane and used it to build their cell walls. So right at the beginning here, we have a complex ecosystem that mirrors in a very primordial form what we see later on in much more advanced biology. We have photosynthetic bacteria, plant bacteria. We have methane-producing bacteria, animal bacteria. And then we also have the critters that like the methane, that want to eat that, which could be like the insects. So it's like all of this stuff is there at the beginning. The ecosystem, the complexity, the interrelationships between these microorganisms, they're already there. So you can see why I'm so excited about this. This is one of those scientific studies that just spikes the ball over the goal line and takes what I've been trying to tell you all this time, and now the scientists are saying it. So here is an example of an ancient fossil microorganism that actually consumed methane, and J. William Schaap is the key guy that was doing this, as you can see at the bottom. The evidence that a diverse group of organisms had already evolved extremely early in the Earth's history, combined with scientists' knowledge of the vast number of stars in the universe and the growing understanding that planets orbit so many of them, strengthens the case for life existing elsewhere in the universe, because it would be extremely unlikely that life formed quickly on Earth but did not arise anywhere else. The idea is it did not just form on Earth, it's everywhere, and it just got dropped off here by whatever processes are already in place. And we've already talked before about Hoyle and Wickramasinghe, in which they discovered that 99.9% of all the dust in our galaxy has the same optical characteristics as if you put freeze-dried bacteria and set it loose in space. Whoa, David, what are you saying? What I'm saying is, that's a geeky way of saying that the sun and all other stars all they do is give off bacteria. The dust, all the stuff that they're shooting out, it's bacteria. It's little guys that at one point were nice and fresh, and then they go out into the cold of space and they get freeze-dried and they shrink, 70% hollow on the inside. Once you have that hollowness, there's only one thing that does that, it's bacteria. And that's what all the dust looks like in our galaxy. So the hypothesis is stars are naturally giving off bacteria all the time. Therefore, this stuff on Earth has been coming out of the sun ever since the sun started. And it just so happens that it got dropped off on Earth. As soon as there was enough water here, they could actually stick and stay. Because before the water was there, you wouldn't have the fossilizing of the bacteria. They might still be coming around, but they wouldn't be able to stick in such a way that you could get fossils. Fossils require things to be wet, and then they get reheated like you're firing clay in a kiln. That's why you have to wait a little while for the water to show up. And then this is just luck that they happen to find this very old deposit of land in Western Australia that happens to be 3.465 billion years old. So this really shifts everything. They're talking about planets are all over the place. They have liquid water, though they don't really mention that here. And that microbes with a complex ecosystem showed up from the beginning here on Earth. This is the scientist, the head scientist now talking. By 3.465 billion years ago, life was already diverse on Earth. That's clear. Primitive photosynthesizers, i.e. plants, methane producers, i.e. like animals, methane users, i.e. like insects. According to J. William Schaap, a professor of paleobiology in the UCLA College and the lead author of the study, here is a picture of Schaap, and you can clearly see this guy is no joke. This is real science. This is not quackademics at all. This tells us life had to have begun substantially earlier, and it confirms it was not difficult for primitive life to form on Earth and to evolve into more advanced microorganisms. Schaap said scientists still do not know how much earlier life might have begun, but it obviously could be the beginning of the universe. And then he says, this is the key line right here, the mic drop. If the conditions are right, it looks like life in the universe should be widespread. There you have it. Boom! Mainstream academic scientists from UCLA, a very credible institution, saying that life in the universe looks like it should be widespread. And all you have to do is start bringing back in the Wickramasinghe and Hoyle data about the galactic dust. And it's like, well, that's what stars are doing ever since they started. The only thing they're giving off is bacteria. That's all they do. The whole freaking universe is a life-generating cosmos, which then makes us start to think, well, wait a minute. I'm alive, and my body is generating bacteria. In fact, there's 10 times more, I don't know if you know this, there's 10 times more bacterial cells in your body than there are human cells. So you have far more microbes that are actually not directly a part of you, but work in harmony with you, than you have in your own body, that are your actual cells. So if that's true, then if stars are giving off all this bacteria, stars could now be life forms. And now you have to think differently. You have to say, well, I hadn't really thought about a star being alive. I hadn't really thought about planets being alive. All of this stuff is already in the Law of One model. It's already in the great ancient religious texts, the Hindu Mahabharata. It's basically in the Bible if you want to read it a certain way. It's all over the place. This idea that the cosmos is alive. It is a life-generating machine. That is the key of where this is all going. Now I want to take you back to this core intrinsic principle that we were starting to explore in the previous episodes before we got into all of the other stuff, regarding the idea that all of space and time is the emanation of a single geometric form. So just so that we have a quick recap here, and I'm not going to go through all this again, because then you'll write comments that are hateful, and then I'll get in trouble. We have Nima Arkani Hamed and Yaroslav Trunka. Remember those two guys? And what they found was that these squiggles in the quantum realm that we measure in bubble chambers, and these kinds of things, all can be derived from a single geometric pattern. And it's only one pattern, which means that literally any quantum activity in the entire universe, if you zoom in on it enough, you zoom down to one point that the whole entire universe is emanating from, as if it is a seed, and the seed flowers into the universe, but the whole universe is like a hologram. It's not really there. The only thing that really exists is the seed. And so the seed fractalizes out, and as it fractalizes out, it actually appears to be occupying space. You trace each part of it and trace it back to the center. So stars would be fractals of this original geometry. Each star has a spherical identity which encapsulates all the different fractals of this geometry that I've been showing you. So the whole universe is this blossoming fractal from one geometry. And do you remember when I was talking about Bataner and Florido and Inasto? And I showed you these superclusters of galaxies, and they're all in these perfect geometric patterns. Why is that? Because that geometry is the flowering of the seed. And all of the galaxies must stay in the geometric lines. We also talked about how galaxies themselves have very strange kinks in the galactic arms. They don't move in a spiral. They actually go straight and then they bend very geometrically. That's because this geometry is a resonance pattern. Geometry is showing us vibration. And so the really amazing thing that you're going to start to see in this season is how DNA is a byproduct of resonance directly. There's no fudge factor that we have to do on this stuff. So just for your review, here is the shape that we saw from these two scientists. This is an original diagram they made of what they call the amplituhedron, this form that the entire universe is made of. Well, something didn't quite look right to me. It seemed a little asymmetrical. I start to think about this. This is the Merkaba, two tetrahedrons back to back. You could flatten it down into 2 dimensions and have it be the Star of David. Same basic idea. And when I started to visualize this, as you're seeing here, I said, oh my God, the math worked out fine. All they needed was to do 4 of the tetrahedrons, but you can add the rest in. And now you have the Merkaba, and it's just got more symmetry, but this actually makes more sense. But bear in mind, even if you don't like that and you don't want to go there, the simple fact that the shape itself is made out of 4 tetrahedrons, each tetrahedron has that Merkaba enfolded within it. Because all of this geometry has this quality they call symmetry, which means you can flip it inside out. And depending on what type of geometry it is, you'll get either another tetrahedron, as in the case of tetrahedrons. If you have the octahedron, it'll flip over into a cube. And if you have the icosahedron, which is those 20 equilateral triangles like a soccer ball, you flip that one over and it turns into a dodecahedron, as I've said. And that's 12 pentagons in a ball. So this geometry is a function of resonance. It didn't take all that long. It was maybe about a year, 2 years after I had first started to get this information about the idea that the universe is a Merkaba that I started to say, well, my God, that means it's a photon. That means that everything is made of light. And that totally fits with all of the great ancient teachings which appear to have been given to us by gods. People who very likely had much more advanced technology at the time they arrived thousands of years ago than we do now. So if those gods had that advanced technology, then they hid it into things like the Star of David, things like the Masonic square and compass symbol, things like the Hindu mandalas that also show the Star of David, and then iterating into other geometric patterns as well. This is all stuff that we've covered before. And I also want to remind you that this scientist, Radek Tropkiewicz, was able to trap photons in this very exotic looking laser arrangement that he's got there. And this is what he saw. The photons, when captured, clearly have this tetrahedral formation. It is the same Merkaba, just tilted on a different angle. It's the same thing that you're seeing here, just slightly more tilted. So what am I saying? I'm saying that these guys, as they're looking at this geometry, inadvertently discovered the original photon that the whole universe is made from. God said, let there be light, and there was light, right? The universe was started from light. We hear this all the time. Even esoteric people in modern times giving alleged information telepathically from some higher source, they always say the universe is made of light. Well, we found the science for that. And what's so cool is that the photon is now this geometric pattern. It's a resonance pattern. And all other photons in the universe are holograms of the original one, which is exactly what the law of one says. So just another quick review. Dr. Hans Jenny took liquid water and put sand in it and vibrated it. That's all he did, is vibrate sand and water with nice pure sound frequency, and boom, look at what he got. The same geometry that we see at the origin of the universe. All you do to get that is create vibration, nothing else. Vibration creates geometry. Geometric structure is a function of frequency. It's very straightforward, it's elegant, it's beautiful, it's amazing. I've also showed you this diagram in which we see that the geometry can morph depending on the frequency. So on the right, we have our Merkaba. On the left, we now have octahedrons and cubes, because remember, this is a 3D drop. This is not a flat diagram. That's a three-dimensional structure in there. So these are, in fact, geometric platonic solids, as we call them. And in this diagram, as I've showed you before, we have all these different phases of geometry that you get simply by changing frequency. And remember, we also had this, where if you have a larger amount of water with sand, then it starts to create multicellular structure, just like we see in the way that molecules line up to form solids. And just like we see with cells forming biological life. That's the part we haven't gotten into yet. Once we make a linkage point between DNA and geometry, it's all over. It's a whole new reality in which that original photon, that original Merkaba, is in fact geometrically fractalizing out into the universe. And DNA is another natural byproduct of its frequency. DNA and the dodecahedron are intimately linked, and I will show you that. Another brief review, just so this is all fresh in your head, shows how this geometry iterates into matter. This was Dr. Robert Moon, looked at the nucleus and cracked the code of the atomic nucleus by seeing that this pattern is It's actually hiding inside the atom depending upon how many protons it has. So in his model, the corners of this geometry are what we call protons, and you can throw away neutrons because you don't need them. There's nothing to balance. Geometry itself is what keeps the harmony and the balance. Neutron is just an assumption. So look in the center of this pattern and you'll see the cube. How many corners does the cube have? There's 4 on the top, 4 on the bottom. Well, that's oxygen. That's the first major stable element, 62.55% of the mass in the universe. This is his solution. So every time you're breathing oxygen, you're breathing atoms with these little cubes in them. Then you got to go to the second level, which is the octahedron with the cube inside. You got to add up all those corners together. So you have your 8 corners of the cube, then you add the 6 more for the octahedron, and now you got silicon, 14 protons, and 21.2% of the mass in the universe, in our Earth at least. So again, these are the most stable. That's why there's more of them than anything else, because atoms want to be there. They want to have these geometric patterns. The other atoms that don't have it are kind of unstable, and they're always wanting to bond. Bonding now means they're creating this geometry. So it totally reinvents what we think. Next shell, as I've said to you before, we go through oxygen, silicon, and then we have iron, which is 1.2%, and now you got your icosahedron there. That's the next layer of this. Then we go down to the bottom of the list. The last one is the dodecahedron, and remember that you got to add all the protons together, so each of the corners, right? So you start with 8, you add the 6 corners of the octahedron, you get 14. You add the 12 corners of the icosahedron to 26, then you add the 20 corners of the dodec, and now you go up to 46. And 46 protons is palladium, and palladium also, as I've said, has really weird properties, cold fusion. You drop those little guys into heavy hydrogen, and they create all this extra heat. And iron is weird because it has an intrinsic magnetic field. There's something about this geometry that's like gating into universal energy and allowing things like magnetic energy and cold fusion to form. So that's all fine and good. We've been through that stuff. Another really cool thing that I don't think I've ever talked about in this show before is that Nassim Haramein has done some really cool work about the fractal nature of each proton. So remember now, I'm saying protons are the corners of a geometric solid, which is ultimately a frequency. That means matter is just a vibration. There's nothing really there. So if your consciousness can generate those frequencies, you could generate matter, you could make matter levitate, you could transmute, and it's unbelievable. Let's take a look. This is a view of the DNA molecule, and what you see here is that just even in the most basic arrangement of the stuff that's inside, you have hexagons and pentagons, but there's a lot more to it than that. Geometry is the big secret. This is what I wanted to end this episode on. This diagram is so incredibly amazing, and I want you to study this closely. Let's start by looking at the red line, start at the bottom, and then move your way up, and notice that red line and the green line is the way that we've all seen DNA work. Well, look at how the red line hugs perfectly along the side of a dodecahedron when you stack them up in a nice little totem pole. The first one is a dark dodecahedron. Then look at the second one. It's technically upside down now from the first one. And notice that the green DNA line hugs precisely along that same side. Then go up to the third one, and it's the same thing. The red line hugs the side of the dodec. Go up to the fourth one, and once again, the red line is hugging the side. So, look, if you don't think this means anything, wait until you get to the next episode about genetic geometry. What I'm saying to you is, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is not a coincidence. And for God's sake, you don't need 12-strand DNA. I'm sorry about the people who want to believe that, and I think the intention behind it was well-meaning. But you don't need 12 strands. One strand DNA is amazing in and of itself. Well, actually the 2 strands, right? I'm thinking of the one strand as a whole, but there's 2 sides to the ladder. And what we're seeing now is that it's as if the dodecahedron is a framework that it's built over. Like the dodecahedron is telling the atoms where to go. Well, I'm not saying that's an accident. I'm saying that's on purpose. I'm saying that there is a geometric vibration, remember frequency, that creates a holding pattern that takes atoms and makes them want to do this. It makes the basic matter in our universe want to create DNA because those little dodecs are out there as a vibration. And when they're there, they're going to take whatever is around them So you get over here, you get over here. Everybody come on in. Here's what you're going to do. Spiral this way up. Do this. Quantum mechanics makes life, and it's a frequency. The frequency pattern is what creates life. In the beginning, there was the word. That's another one you see all the time, right? This is the word. This is the sound. This is the aum. It is the primordial vibration that not only created the universe, but it created life. So when we come back in the next episode, we're going to take this little seed that we've just started to play around with and take it into a whole much greater level than we had before. And this directly impacts everything we've been talking about regarding the solar flash and ascension, because as our energetics in our solar system upgrades, that frequency change will change matter, it'll change the rate of time, and it'll change the structure of biological life, pushing it to a higher evolution. David Wilcock, and this is Wisdom Teachings, bringing you the information you need that will set you free. Thanks for watching.
All right, guys. So then in the next episode, he goes into describing like the molecular levels of DNA and how at the smallest levels they are actually tetrahedrons. And it's just mind blowing because everything started from one source, fractaled out, just like the branches of a tree or stems of a plant. It all just fractaled out and made everything. And as he said, he talks about how all of this is leading to ascension. The season finale for season 28. Hold on. For season 28, the last episode, he was talking about how in the universe for the last decade it's been heating up. And although we want to blame it on fossil fuels, fracking, oil companies, and he even said himself he doesn't want to give them like a way out of the problem that they had created, but not necessarily all their fault. Like in the last decade, the Earth has been heating up more so than it would have even if we kept going like this for the next 50 years. It's heating up because somehow in our solar system there's a loophole, and interstellar cloud had got in and made another Van Allen belt around the Earth. So around the Earth, as you know, there's a magnetic torus, or what would they call it? I have the word. So around the Earth, there's like a magnetic force field that looks like this, which is a torus. So it's like going like this, going from the middle, going down, and then up like this, and it just keeps going like this. It's called a torus. Okay. We have the same thing around our body. From the heart, the center of the heart is where our torus is, and it flows up out of our body and around, down through the bottom of our feet, back up to our heart. The center is in our heart. Okay, so that is our torus field from our heart. The Earth has the same thing in the magnetic field, but they call it the Van Allen belt because there's different levels of waves of magnetics and radiation and blah blah blah. So this interstellar cloud that got in about a decade ago started heating everything up. And it's been doing it to Pluto and all the other planets, they've noticed. That's how Pluto got the heart shape on it, from shifting of it's expanding basically. So the Earth is expanding as well. Like the Earth is growing in size. Our atmosphere has grown in size. Our Van Allen belt or torus sphere has grown. So in doing this, it's heating up the Earth. They're calling it a solar flash because what's going to happen is the Earth's going to heat up all at once. Eventually, it's just going to get hotter and hotter and hotter. Why people are ascending so quickly now is because once you're getting to the end of your ascension, you're kind of going to be changing frequency. So, meaning this frequency here is 3-dimensional to 4-dimensional frequency. So, you want to hit a frequency higher consciously so that when this ascension happens and the earth heats up, we won't feel it because we'll ascend out of this reality into the next dimension. So we won't even be here when it happens. The whole universe, the whole solar system is upgrading. So everything in it must also biologically upgrade, which is what he was talking about. So in the next episode, I want to just show you briefly what's going to happen in the next episode because it's um, amazing.
Is there a secret underlying all of biological life that almost everyone, except for perhaps 2 scientists in the world, have missed? Could there be a geometric code underlying not only the structure and formation of DNA, but all of the rules that life itself is forming by? Can we find that the basic relationships between a tetrahedron and a dodecahedron precisely delineate relationships of how life forms at the quantum level? And if that is true, then can we develop a geometric view of genetics in which the idea of frequency and resonance becomes essential to life? If that resonance changes, does that mean that life itself could evolve into some higher form? These are only some of the questions that you will find answers for in this episode of Wisdom Teachings. In the last episode, we really hit it out of the park. This is a whole new direction that after 5 years of me doing this show, I finally have built up to the point to bring you the mother lode, the holy grail, the Hail Mary pass of geometric physics. We already saw UCLA telling us that life is common throughout the universe and showing microorganisms having a little ecosystem all the way back as soon as Earth cooled down enough to have water. And they're concluding, yeah, there's planets everywhere, there's water everywhere, and there's life everywhere. Life is common. But in the last episode, we started to get into the keys of why life might be common. We talked about the idea that the universe, all quantum physics, every piece of matter in the whole universe could be bubbling off of one Merkaba, one star tetrahedron or Star of David formation. And all the other geometries, as I've showed you so much in previous episodes, they all blossom off of that. So the answer to the big, big puzzle always comes back to geometry. Geometry is the big secret, and it's always good to remind you of this resonance pattern, which was discovered by Hans Jenny, where he takes sand and puts it in water, and the sand is what's white and the water is what's dark, and then he vibrates it with pure sound frequency. That's all he's doing. And that shape in the middle is the same shape that we're now seeing appears to be the only real thing in the universe. Everything else is just a hall of mirrors, reflected and reflected and reflected off of that original pattern. And very importantly, if you change the sound frequency, it's the same water, it's the same sand, but the shapes totally change, and on the left you go from tetrahedrons to now having octahedrons and cubes, because that is a 3-dimensional spherical type of drop. So we were seeing how this all shows up down at the quantum level, that there is a secret knowledge about the nucleus of the atom in which protons are actually corners of a geometry. So you can get rid of neutrons, you don't need them. Neutrons were only there to create balance. Remember, there's always like one less neutron than the number of protons? Well, that's just because they didn't know how the protons didn't collide with each other, right? Well, with this new geometry, there's a force field. There's a standing wave pattern that's holding them apart because they're the corners of the wave. And the corners, as we saw in those frequency diagrams with the sand, the corners are where all the sand aggregates. That's where all the movement pushes everything together. It's called a node point. So now protons are just node points of a geometry. And as you get higher order atoms, you actually have shells inside the nucleus, just like we see shells in the electrons. And those shells correspond to different geometries. So again, the moon model, take a look here. You have the cube in the middle, followed by the octahedron, and you count up all the points as it goes up, followed by the icosahedron, and then on the outside, you have your dodecahedron. We talked about how the electrons have the tetrahedron in their shape. There's other geometric patterns in the electrons as well, as we see in these two diagrams here. I showed you the molecule and how that molecule has a geometric pattern. Well, now I'm going to show you something new, or something that I brought up before, but it's very, very relevant to what we're talking about today. And that is this very strange mystery of what is called microclusters. Now, a lot of people have gotten all excited about, they'll call it monatomic gold, or they'll call it ORMUS, orbitally rearranged monatomic elements. But there's something strange that matter does that can't be explained in the conventional physical models. All you have to do is shoot out one atom at a time, similar to the old idea of the tennis ball shooter, right? If you want to play tennis and practice, and it shoots out one tennis ball at a time, and you try to hit each ball as it comes at you, it might be different each time. Now imagine that you're doing that at the quantum level, but you're doing it with individual atoms. Now, if it was tennis balls, right, tennis balls are just going to be rolling all over the court, you would never expect that the tennis balls would start to gravitationally attract to each other and start to cluster together. And you definitely wouldn't expect that the tennis balls would form geometric shapes as they cluster together. But that's the difference between macrophysics and microphysics. When you go micro, it does happen. That's what's so weird. You shoot out those atoms one at a time, and they start forming these weird clusters called microclusters. So this is actually what it looks like. On the left, you have a cube octahedron, which is about 459 atoms of gold. And on the right, you have the icosahedron, which we keep talking about, with 561 atoms of gold. Now, again, you don't have to do any work. You don't have to synthesize this in a lab. This is what atoms naturally want to do. So what I'm saying is the atoms are behaving like the sand. There's something around us. There's something around us that wants to push atoms together geometrically. Well, what would do that? Frequency, resonance. The resonance is what's capturing those atoms as they shoot out from our little tennis ball shooter and sticks them together. The resonance makes them want to go into geometric clusters. And interestingly enough, they twist and turn a little bit as they form that cluster. Take a look at this. This is showing how that same gold microcluster that we saw on the left, about 460 atoms, is actually making subtle changes in the shape. So it's not like it just sits there. There's geometric wave currents that show up that actually move it around. But if you look down on the bottom, second over from the right, K, notice how that one is very much like a hexagon, but then the J right next to it is almost round. You can see how all of them have different types of geometry that got pushed out of shape. So this is one of the really, really strange things that's going on down at the quantum level. There's some energy, which I believe is ultimately hidden in gravity, and I've talked about this before. There's something bubbling around in gravity. There's a frequency in gravity, and the Russians call it gravity spin waves. I call it the source field. And it's this geometric resonance, just like in the water. It's taking these atoms and saying, you go here, you go here. So think back to what I said about DNA in the last episode. Think about how, and we're going to show you again, DNA is a dodecahedral crystal. That's the wave that's pushing the DNA molecules together, the little amino acids, to make the DNA. It's actually something that's around us all the time, which would mean life is a quantum field. And then the thing that trips me out so much, and I've been trying to teach this for years, and I feel so great to do this on this show now, is the idea that life and the laws that make life is a direct outcropping of laws that are governing atoms and molecules. There's nothing special about life, and I don't mean that derogatively. I'm saying there's nothing different about it. It's the same stuff, it's the same laws, it's the same rules. And another really, really important point to remember is that when you're dealing on the quantum level, there's all kinds of dimensional shifts going on. There's phase shifting going on. So let's now look once again. This goes way back. I'm tying a lot of threads together for you now. If you've watched it all the way from the beginning of the show, you might remember this. Carbon-60 atom, fullerene, looks like a nice solid ball, right? 60 carbon atoms forming a little geometric cluster. They've studied it in microscopes. They know what it is. This was a study done by Olaf Nares, where they take these carbon-60 molecules and they shoot them through a little slot, which is 100 nanometers wide. It's just a hole, kind of like a keyhole, and they slam it into that diffraction grating, and then the really weird part is that as they come out on the other side, they are not carbon-60 atoms anymore. They turn into an interference pattern, which is a wave. So simply thumping the fullerene, the carbon-60, simply thumping it against the wall, it somehow dimensionally shifts, and it goes from the particle phase to the wave phase. But then if you wait a little bit longer, the wave coalesces back into the carbon-60 again. Now, why am I saying that? Because DNA is the same tiny size, more or less. It's that small. So the DNA molecule can literally be phasing in and out of reality itself, and that is very compelling. The interference pattern that is made by that fullerene as it turns into a wave, we don't get to see that in DNA. We assume DNA is solid, but it's the same exact size where this kind of phenomenon is happening. So now we have to start to look at DNA differently and say, well, it's solid because we're measuring it as if it was solid, but there could be a level in which it's a total wave and doesn't have solid particles at all. Well, hold on, that's exactly what we're saying. We're saying DNA is a resonance pattern. We're saying that the little dodecahedrons are actually vibrations in this fluid-like gravitational stuff that we're in that we can't see, just like fishes can't see they're in a fishbowl. They can't detect the water unless it's gone, of course. The dodecs are that crystallized vibration, just like with the microclusters. They're taking everything around them and they're making it go in there. This is what directly leads us to the DNA phantom effect. And this is a very, very strange thing that was discovered by two Russian scientists, Dr. Garyaev and Dr. Vladimir Poponin. We're going to talk a lot more about Garyaev in the future. Now, what am I showing you here? On the left, we have this little tiny, tiny room where they're measuring how many photons are in the room. And photons, of course, are little bursts of light. So there are these devices that will allow you to count photons one at a time and record where they are in their position. So that's what they started with. Then they took DNA and they put the DNA into the room. And much to their absolute amazement, all of the light in the room got absorbed into the DNA. The DNA attracts light just like a black hole. The DNA exerts gravitational force. I've talked about this for 25 years, more or less, but I never really explained why it does that. The DNA has the dodecahedron pattern in it. That's a resonance pattern. Just like any sand that you had in that drop of water is going to get attracted into the geometric pattern. You drop more sand in from the top, it's all going to get stuck into whatever geometric pattern it's making. So that DNA by itself, its simple existence there, is attracting in all light. And the really strange part, as I said, is the third tube. Because the third tube is what happens when you take the DNA. You could count those photons. You would see the image of my body wherever I stand the most. There's going to be a ghost of me. It's going to be very, very faint. Very hard to detect unless you have really good optics, but you could do it. You could have a whole room full of people sitting for a lecture, and they'd all leave, and if you had the right equipment, you could photograph where they were for up to 30 days. That's the awesome implications of this discovery. So if DNA is doing this, if it's absorbing light and holding it, then light is obviously very important for the DNA. This gets into the work of Dr. Fritz Albert Popp, as I've said, who discovered that DNA holds about 1,000 photons inside of it, like a fiber optic cable. And what he discovered was that cancer cells are cells that don't have light in them anymore. A carcinogen, a cancer-causing chemical, is a chemical that blocks ultraviolet light from getting into your DNA. So now we have a totally new model of health biology where the photons determine how healthy you are. And guess what type of food has the most amount of photons in it? Vegetables. You have 10,000 photons per square centimeter on vegetable matter as opposed to only 1,000 for animal tissue. So vegetables are loaded with this light. And since it's dark inside your body, you actually have to eat vegetables because you got to feed your light body. There is some part of you that consists of all that light in your DNA, like a ghost, and that might be some other part of you that exists away from your physical body, as this idea of the soul. Maybe the pattern of light is the soul. And those photons are held by your DNA, and as they go in there, they're cultured by that resonance. There's a geometric resonance there. So all of this, again, is very, very fascinating, but where it really comes into play is the idea of ascension. The idea that maybe DNA isn't so solid and fixed. DNA could move around. And all you have to do is remember what I said about the fullerene, right? The fullerene, you slam it, and it flips over somehow into this wave, and it doesn't have any solid mass at all. So maybe the DNA is always flipping over, and as it flips over into a wave pattern, pieces of it can rearrange and go from one place to another, so that when it reconstitutes, it could have a different pattern, a different structure. If you introduce a different frequency into the DNA, then it might go into a wave phase, and then when it comes back to a particle phase, now all of a sudden, you have a different organism. You might be able to intelligently beam the right patterns in. Now you have a model of why our solar system might transform as we go through this epic solar flash. That's really very interesting to me. So let's review this. We're looking at the DNA molecule. We see a totem pole of dodecahedrons, gray and white. You notice that the double helix is wrapping along the edges. And again, I like to think of this as another good analogy would be like a stream. When you say to yourself, let's look at the rocks at the bottom of the stream. How did the rocks get there? Did the rocks attract the water? Were the rocks already there and then the water is magnetically attracted to rocks? No. What happens is that it rains and the rains are pouring down the mountainside. The rocks come out of the dirt, they get caught up in a flow of water, and they roll down to the lowest point. They roll into the bottom of the stream, which is where all the water is draining. So the rocks didn't start there, the rocks got pushed there. So what I'm saying is that DNA behaves the same way. Water.
Sorry guys, my son had a tantrum, so I paused it so that he could scream without it getting on this. So I'm just gonna play it
You have
now.
DNA in a sealed test tube and a regular test tube with ordinary water next to it. You zap them for 18 hours with 7 hertz frequency, which is the basic electromagnetic energy that the Earth gives off. And the water in the tube that's just plain water has DNA grow into it. And if you're like me, and you heard me say this before, you're scratching your head going, well, wait a minute, David. Where the heck did that DNA come from? Did it melt through the wall? No. What I'm saying is the water molecules got rearranged on the quantum level to become DNA. They had transmutation like alchemy. And that totally gets back to this idea of the buckyball slamming against the wall, turning into a wave pattern, and then reconstituting. Those atoms of water are turning into waves, and when they get new information, those little particles in the waveform are pushed back into a new form. So when they crystallize, now they start to form DNA. And this is probably happening trillions of times a second, and it coalesces DNA where DNA wasn't going to be. Montagnier's experiment is another one that you have to bring up every time we talk about this, because it so elegantly shows life is going to show up everywhere. All I'm doing is taking really highly credible scientists, Nobel Prize winners, and PhDs and MDs and putting their work together and having it all make sense. And even when we photograph the DNA molecule with an X-ray diffraction image and getting a little microscopic picture of it, we still actually see very compelling geometry. This is, you can look it up on Google, it's pretty easy to find. Just look up DNA diffraction, X-ray diffraction. This is what DNA looks like when you actually zap X-rays through it and you take a little quantum photograph of it. That looks way too geometric compared to how DNA is typically shown to us, but it all fits together in this idea that DNA is a resonance pattern. That DNA is a crystal of this resonance that's in the universe. Now, I don't want to stop on DNA because DNA only takes us part of the way there. Dr. Mark White, who is a medical doctor, has actually cracked the code of life and found a geometric underpinning. Now, what do I mean by that? Before we get any deeper into this. So let's break this down a little bit before I get into the specifics, because this is important. Somebody could argue, well, David, okay, so you got Montagnier who shows that DNA shows up in water. But if you prove that DNA can form that way, you don't have a full biological model, dude. you've only got DNA, which is just like a crystal anyway. That's not going to form life. Okay, well, let's talk about that. What do you need to form living tissue? Living tissue is made of protein. All the different types of tissue you could ever have are proteins, and we know this. Basic biology. What are proteins made of? They're made of amino acids. What is DNA made of? 4 basic types of amino acids. So now what we have to do to take life and make life exist, to make living stuff happen, you have to build proteins, which means you have to build amino acids, and then you have to combine them in the right ways so that they will actually form protein molecules. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because the relationships between amino acids are very, very complex. It's like a whole family reunion in which there's all these animosities, and certain people are going to want to talk to each other, but other people will turn their backs on each other and never want to talk. Then you have, in the case of the amino acids, you have some that really like to be in water, and you have some that really don't like to be in water.
Okay, so we'll just get to it. I'm just going to fast forward to the part where he shows the diagram of what the doctor found out, the geometric shape. He mapped it geometrically. This is what it looks like. A dodecahedron. So he made it into a 3D image by combining. Here, hold on. So here it is, broken apart. So you can see it. And then remember what he was saying about like he was adding up hydrogen, carbon, hydrogen, iron, blah blah blah. Well, he does that too to explain how he came to the conclusion that DNA makes this shape. What the hell? Oh Lord. Okay, so here you can see there's numbers, and each number is at a corner, and those corners are that number. So 15, blah blah blah. There's 20 corners. So he mapped it out to 20 corners to make this 3D shape. Okay. So there's only 4 different um, 4 different proteins. They have A, G, C, and U. A, G, C, U. Those are the 4 proteins that make up tissue. So he made them into these balls with showing you with geometric shapes with something. You have to watch the episode to understand. I'm not a freaking doctor or here. This might give you some clarity of what I'm trying to say. There's a code, okay? A genetic code, and this is the genetic code, and how he placed it together to make a geometric shape. So this is what it says. The genetic information in the mRNA is composed of an alternating sequence of the four bases adenine, guanine, cytosine, and uracil. This alternating sequence provides the unique code specifying each of the 20 amino acids naturally found in protein. 20 amino acids. It was early realized that the only way codons for the 20 amino acids could be spelled out from the four available nucleotides was to use combinations of at least three basis codons. Four with like 3 square equals 64 combination. In the beginning of the 1960s, the nature of the genetic code was experimentally tested using artificial mRNAs composed of only one base homopolymers or a composition of synthetic trinucleotides presenting all 64 possible codon combinations. Using these techniques, the genetic code was solved, and the main contributors, Nierenberg and Corana, were awarded the 1968 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. Why won't this do this? So he mapped it into a three-dimensional shape, which is, it looks like a triangle, but he calls it something else. With the four basic nucleotides. And then he breaks it into colors for coding. And then this is like more complex and only like a biologist would understand this. I don't even. And even David Wilcox is like, you just coded it. I'm not even going to try to explain it because I don't understand this, but here it is. All the information of how he came to this conclusion, how he coded it, how he architecturally built it, and how it all makes sense at the end of the architectural. He built it. Okay, he built it. He mapped DNA into a three-dimensional geometric shape. That's all you need to know. And it's seen throughout the whole universe. And like the whole universe, it's all fractalized. So here you see the tetrahedrons. And then when you put them all together, it makes a dodecahedron. So at the cellular level, it's a tetrahedron. And then putting it together makes a dodecahedron. So these are all the same sacred geometry or platonic solids that's seen throughout the whole universe. But at the molecular level, the smallest level, they're all tetrahedrons. Fractalized out, making other other platonic solids that are sacred geometry. Tetrahedron at the molecular level. And he even maps them into tetrahedrons and then places them into small pentagons as he maps them. Damn it, I won't show it. So those are like pentagons put together, and then they're placed together with the tetrahedrons in the middle, as you can see. Of each of the pentagons, you can see the tetrahedron, and then put together, they make the dodecaedron. And then he stacked them on top of each other and placed the two helixes around it, and bam, you got DNA. So it's crazy that everything in the universe, down to the cellular level of even human beings and matter itself, were all tetrahedrons or Merkabas. Watching this series is something that you should do on your ascension journey, because it explains to you what's happening in the universe and how that has an effect on us biologically and emotionally and physically. So there's frequencies raising. One of the things that we have to get used to is the fact that these new vibrations and these new frequencies that are coming into our space, our reality right now, there's something holding all of it back, so that we're only getting little blasts at a time. But if we were to get it all at once, everybody would just lose their minds. Like, they would just go crazy. There would be lots of different things happening, like crazy things would be happening, because nobody would understand how to understand what's happening to them. That's why ascension is slow. Some people have it a sudden burst. Some people have it a slow, gradual thing over years. For me, it was years. It took me I kept hearing the voice saying, like, hey, listen to me. There's something going on you need to know about. And I focused on it for like a few months and then ignored it to be part of the conformity of life, wanting a job, wanting to make money, wanting to be successful, famous, blah, blah, blah. I don't care about that anymore. Honestly, I'm more about getting the information out. Like, it's all in here. I want it out. It's always jumbling up in there, which is why I share constantly on my stories, why I talk about it on my Instagram, my Facebook. I needed to do it. I just needed to talk about it. I needed to share it. I needed to get it out. And that's what most of us light workers, ascending light bodies are doing. We are all sharing, because that is what we're urged and encouraged to do by our higher selves, by our spirit guides, by Source, if you want to call it that. I call it Lord and Lady, same thing. It's feminine, masculine energies. It's throughout the whole universe. You have to understand that. But in this sense, there is no actual gender. It's oneness. I am both male and female. Johnny's both male and female. We have different body parts so that we can reproduce, but we're both the same things. We're one thing. We're all one. So in that retrospect, we have to also think about like genders as in non-existent. There is no such thing as genders. There's really not. There's no such thing as sexual orientation. There's no such thing as race or what we use to divide each other from each other. You know what I mean? Like, there's no political stance. There's no this. There's no that. There's no labels. We are one thing. We're all energy. We're all light. We're all photonic, energetic consciousness. There's nothing else. And when you understand and accept and acknowledge that, that's when things start happening. Like he was saying, people can levitate things, or some people get psychic abilities. Like me, I can see messages in the clouds itself. Now, maybe, because he said that you can manipulate matter once you get to a certain level of ascension, maybe my brain is manipulating the matter in the clouds because I am one and I understand that the clouds are me and I'm the clouds. And maybe they're just telling me what I already knew, but I'm trying to remember. Maybe that's what's happening. I don't know. That's a possibility. I like to think, though, that it's the ascending masters. Like when I took the video yesterday of the little glowing orb that was in one spot in the sky and it just sat there. I'd like to think that it's the ascending masters giving me knowledge to for me to remember where I came from, what I am, who I am, and how I'm supposed to proceed with the messages that I'm bringing from them, because that's what they're doing. They're trying to awaken us faster before this solar flash. Now, I'm not too familiar with the solar flash myself. I'd have to go back into some episodes before. I can use that as my next episode if that's what you would like. Um, my next episode will be all about the solar flash and what that actually means and how that coincides with our ascension. So it could be a part 2 of the ascension. So um, I could do that for you. Today I'll do all of that research and I'll write it down and then I'll bring it to you tomorrow. And that'll be my episode 3, Ascension Part 2. But I wanted to tell you all this because it's all related. It's all relevant. It's all part of the same thing that we're trying to get to. Finding source, or rather, now that you understand source is us and we are source, now that you understand that there is no finding, it's more like remembering. So maybe now I can change the name of my series to Remembering Source, because that sounds more like along the lines of what's happening. We're remembering. We're not finding, we're not discovering, we're not reinventing or whatever you want to call it. We are remembering. It's a memory that was lost as we reincarnated and like lots of times. And if you want to understand what that means, I will post all the links to all the relevant things that you need to watch if you are really interested in learning all about this ascension and what it means for us and why we're ascending in the precession of the equinox. I will post all of those things into the description box and you can learn as much as you want. And I suggest highly, I recommend highly, and I cannot stress it enough. Oh Lord, hold on. Sorry. So everything that you guys would like to learn about this whole thing that I'm explaining in this episode, I will post all the links in the description box for you. And like I said, I highly recommend, and I cannot stress enough, get an account with Gaia.com. They actually have really like cheap monthly subscriptions. Um, I've had it for like ever now because I love what they teach on there. It's just so much information and I'm learning so much. And literally after each episode that I watch of wisdom teachings, I have to meditate just because my brain, it hurts because it's so much information all at once and it all like light bulb is going off in your head constantly because it all just sense, like absolute sense, and it's beautiful. And you have to. And spirit science is on there now, so whatever you want to know about spirit science is on there. You just search it. Anyway, I'm gonna end this now, and I will put everything in the description box. I'm gonna make a Word document with everything in it first, and then I'm just copy and paste in there so I don't have to go searching for everything. But yes, I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you stay tuned and you tune into the next episode tomorrow for part 2 of Ascension. I'm going to go and research the uh, solar flash and what it means for Ascension today. So I hope everybody has a wonderful Saturday, and I hope that you all get enough vegetables for your photonic light body because that needs to be fed. And I'm gonna go get some vegetables myself because it's a little dull on the light side. So, love y'all, love and light. Namaste. Ah.